Number 5. Numbers, chapter 16, verse 23 and 31 through 33. Then the Lord said to Moses, Say to the assembly, Move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. As soon as he finished saying all this, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them with their households and all of Korah's men and all their possessions. They went down alive into the grave. With everything they owned, the earth closed over them, and they perished and were gone from the community. The above happened years after Moses killed the Egyptian guy and led a country's worth of Hebrews into the desert where they wandered aimlessly for several decades, as seen in the Ten Commandments. At some point, a troublemaker named Korah and 250 supporters banded together and aired a series of complaints about the fact that they were wandering aimlessly in the desert. God listened carefully to their complaints, weighed their points, and then made the earth eat them alive. The text does not make it clear whether or not the earth made that nom nom sound, so scholars are forced to speculate. This really puts things in perspective for the anti-religion critics. They can complain all they want about religious intolerance and pushy evangelicals trying to censor TV and annoy people into conversion. But that's a hell of an improvement over the situation during the Exodus, when God would feed non-believers to the mighty Sarlacc. 2 verses later, God sends down a ball of fire and incinerates the other 250 rebels. You have to imagine there was a moment of tentative relief when the 250 rebels saw that they had not been swallowed up along with Korah. Yeah, they probably said, "Thank you! We were just about to bury that asshole ourselves. Fortunately, we all have learned the error of our rebellious ways, and hey, what's the fire?" Number 4, Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 11 and 12. If two men are fighting, and the wife of one of them comes to rescue her husband from his assailant, and she reaches out and seizes him by his private parts, you shall cut off her hand. Show her no mercy. This is a man's law, right here. When Conan became king at the end of Conan the Destroyer, you can bet he made sure there was a rule just like this his first day in office. Ladies, we respect your right to resolve disputes in whatever manner you feel necessary for the situation, but do not grab the junk. The words in the Bible are actually those of God, speaking to the Hebrews and taking time to add the junk grab rule into the supplemental commandments that didn't make it into the original 10. This had to be right after God realized his plan for a male-dominated society had a fatal flaw, which is that the woman could prevail in any conflict simply by grabbing the man's junk. Now, you nervous liberal types are complaining that this is barbaric and misogynistic. Perhaps a little context helps. Just a couple of pages earlier, in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 1, we get this. No one who has been emasculated by crushing or cutting may enter the assembly of the Lord. Emasculated by crushing? Gah! Everything in the Bible has to be understood in context of the times these people were living in, and apparently these people lived in a time when crushing the nuts was so common that the crushed nuts victim were an entire demographic that had to be accounted for in the law. Call these commandments savage if you want, but if you were God, how many nuts would you have to see crushed before you overreacted? We're thinking the answer is 2. Of course, if you're not a believer and don't think this grab the nuts, lose a hand commandment is from the Almighty at all, then it becomes obvious what happened. The rule was handed down by some angry clergyman within the first minute or so of having his junk crushed. All perspective tends to go out the window at that moment. Number 3, quote from 1 Kings, chapter 18, verse 24 and 38 through 40. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. Then the fire of the Lord fell, and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all of the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, The Lord, he is God! The Lord, he is God! Then Elijah commanded them, Seize the prophets of Baal! Don't let anyone get away! They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon valley, and slaughtered there. That is how they used to do religious debates back in the day. The situation was that the people of Israel had taken to Baal worship, a faith that added a lot of horrors to its rituals and thus gained immediate popularity. Elijah, not the one with the bears, that was Elisha, decided that the people had to choose between Baal and God. Rather than write a series of books or give a bunch of boring speeches, Elijah invited 450 Baal worshippers to a contest, where both sides would set up an animal sacrifice. Whichever god could rain down fire on its sacrifice would be the one everybody worshipped. It's brilliant in its simplicity, and we're surprised religious debates were ever carried out any other way after that. You can raise all the intellectual challenges you want about faith and the origins of the universe, but at the end of the day, you have to worship the God who can set you on fire. It's common sense. We like to think Elijah stood in front of the howling column of heavenly fire, straightened his robes, turned to the crowd, and said, "Thus my opponent's argument fails." Then he finished the debate in the way that all debates should be finished, by having the losers slaughtered. Number 2. Judges, chapter 15, verses 15 and 16. Finding a fresh jawbone of an ass, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, "With an ass's jawbone I have made asses of them. With an ass's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men." Samson could have dominated this list if we had let him. He was a sort of biblical superhero, who could basically call down the powers of the Lord to turn himself into a hurricane of ass-kicking. His whole story involves a feud with the Philistines, people who lived in part of what is now Israel and embraced the long tradition of going to war with the Jews. Or specifically, the Philistines went to war against just Samson, and they pretty much lost. On this particular day, the Philistines had burned Samson's wife to death, and sent some men to capture him. Specifically, they sent 3,000 men. So at that point, Samson either had the reputation as a world-class badass, or the Philistine army was the equivalent of those shitty battle droids from the Star Wars prequels that could only kill an enemy soldier by crushing him under a pile of their own corpses. Either way, they didn't send enough. Samson tore apart the skull of a nearby dead donkey, then killed 1,000 men with it. 1,000. What should be emphasized in this story was the bravery of the Philistine soldiers, specifically the ones in the back who kept charging even after seeing 700 or so of their comrades go down with shattered skulls. We're talking about guys who probably climbed over the piles of dead bodies 15 feet high to get at him. If this story seems improbable, you can always claim mistranslation. For instance, in some versions of the story, it's 20 Philistines instead of 1,000. We like to think they merely made the mistake of confusing a donkey's jawbone with that of a Tyrannosaurus rex. Or perhaps donkey's jawbone was mistranslated from the original Hebrew word for minigun. Runners-up for this spot on the list included Joseph Basebeth, who, according to 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 8, raised his spear against 800 men whom he killed in one encounter. Obviously, he lost points for killing fewer men and for using an actual weapon to do it, which almost seems like cheating at this point. There was also Anath in Judges chapter 3, verse 31, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. An ox goad is a sharp stick you use to poke oxen. That started the Israeli tradition of killing large numbers of their enemies with farmyard tools, which continued through Samson and on to modern times, where the 6 Days' War of 1967 was won by a crippled Israeli peasant wielding a watering can. Either way, the Philistines almost certainly remembered Samson as the worst thing that ever happened to them. Until David came along. Number 1. 1 Samuel, chapter 18, verses 25 to 27. Saul replied, "Say to David, the king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. When the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. So before the allotted time elapsed, David and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines. He brought their foreskins and presented the full number to the king, so that he might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him his daughter, Michal, in marriage. This passage raises several thousand questions. Just off the top of our head, what did Saul, the king at the time, want with 100 foreskins? Was he going to make a scarf? Did David think this was a strange request? If this was secretly a plan to have David killed, why didn't he require he bring back, say, 100 bear foreskins? Did David just wander into Philistia and kill the first 200 men he saw? Did they think this was odd? Or, with all the other shit that went down back then, did they just shrug it off? How do you forcibly circumcise 200 men without violating the "don't grab the junk" commandment from earlier? Whose job was it to count the foreskins after David came back? Do they make a pair of tongs long enough for this task? We're guessing we'll never know. It doesn't matter, because at its heart this story is about love. For the hand of Michal, David went further than any man would have gone. Way, 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 way further. Ladies, when a man finally proposes to you, ask him one simple question. How many dongs would you mutilate for me? If you demand 100 and he doesn't blink, he's a keeper. But if he's David, who is sent after 100 and then came back with twice that many just for the hell of it, well, you've got a love for the ages.